mismanagement by the government in the Soviet Union. And the irony is, right.
I didn't know that.
It's one of the most frail sections and the irony is, one of the world's great famines occurred in the Soviet Union.
How come?
Mismanagement by the government. Milton Friedman once said that if the government took over the Sahara Desert, there would be a shortage of sand. And the Soviet Union, it was just that way.
All right.
Mr. Caputo, go ahead, 6 minutes.
Great. Thank you very much. Mr. Fadden, I'm going to key in on the first note that I took from what you said. You said, this threat has been with us for some time. Now, we've heard from different people, but you have a fairly distinguished background in this regard. How long has this issue been with us, and is it intensifying, or are we just more likely to discover it right now?
Chairman, I think it's difficult to, pick a particular day or week or month, but I would say that easily it has been with us in a noticeable way in the last couple of years of Mr. Harper's government. It existed before then, but I think that with the passage of time it's intensified and it continues to intensify. I think the most noticeable increase in intensity occurred after President Xi became the leader of China. His activity is much more aggressive and proactive, and that's been manifested in all of the policies of the People's Republic, both with respect to foreign interference and more generally.
All right. Now, obviously, we take this act is country agnostic so far. But have you noticed any other the intensity from any other foreign state actors?
I think that, Mr. Chairman, China stands out, but I also think, as has been reported in the media, Iran is becoming slightly more active. I think India as well, and not just the killing of Mr. Najjar, but throughout the community. And Russia operates, I think, in a slightly different way. They intervene. If China sort of covers the waterfront as much as they can, Russia tends to be more specific. They're more like a surgeon. And they do intervene. I don't think it's necessarily increased in intensity a great deal. They're there and they continue to do so. Not necessarily through their diaspora, though. That's the one big difference between them and China.
I see what you're saying. So you've commented that there's been a fairly recent difference in intensity when it comes to foreign interference. Is that solely on foreign state actors having a greater desire to interfere, or is there something that's happening here in Canada, or a lack of enforcement perhaps, that is playing into that, if that makes sense?
I think it's a bit of both. I think, as I said a minute ago, China in particular, but also others, have become much, much more aggressive and assertive. But I also think that compared to our close allies, Canada has been a little bit slower in providing the state with tools to deal with this. I'm not suggesting that it's been ignored, but I am suggesting it's taken us a while to get there. The United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia have dealt with this issue, I think, faster than we have. Your colleagues in Australia, for example, have enacted a variety of pieces of legislation directly to address both foreign interference and espionage. So I think the main difference is when an adversary goes through a list of countries that it wants to attack, it will pick every country and do something in all of them. But if there's one that is slightly less organized, slightly less structured to push back, they'll make a bit of an effort there.
There are some significant amendments to the Security of Information Act with significant offenses and punishment. I think pretty much all of them involving life imprisonment. I know other offenses involving life imprisonment can be things like treason, mutiny, and things like that. Do you feel that the offenses listed in these new amendments to the SOIA, do you think the punishments are in line with how, do the punishments match how serious the offenses are, in your opinion?
Ce qu'il faut que vous compreniez, c'est qu'à la base,
Well, I'm a defense lawyer first. So I take a humanist approach to my clients, and that's what guides me on a daily basis. But traditionally, life sentences have to do with violence or a risk to life, for example, or the risk to someone's personal integrity or terrorism. And when I read this bill,
controversial, but in Section 31 of the bill, we have the 5-year mandatory parliamentary review. And in this legislation, differently from the NCICOP Act, there's also a report that needs to be given to Parliament within 1 year of that review. My concern is that we're currently almost 7 years, or we're 2 years overdue for the report on the NCICOP Act. And I'm concerned that if this legislation goes forward as is, that a future parliament, and it might not be until 2 parliaments from now, given that there's a 4-year mandate if there's a majority government, it might not be until 2 parliaments from now that this critical legislation gets reviewed. And so, Dr. Leuprecht, I was wondering if you had any suggestions or recommendations on perhaps should we shorten that review period from 5 years? And should we put additional language in there to ensure that this review takes precedence at committee rather than, just being shuttled off whenever another piece of legislation or an important issue comes up, that just like the NCICOP Act review has been delayed? Thank you.
We live in a democracy, and it's ultimately up to the government of the day and our elected representatives to decide what the priorities are, how they're going to tackle them. And I think the Prime Minister has made that very clear also with intelligence and national security. There are, of course, other examples. The Proceeds of Crime, Money Laundering, Terrorism Financing Act, where the review is long overdue. I think, nonetheless, as a prof, my students, the first thing they always want to do is change legislation. I always tell them, changing legislation is probably the single hardest thing you could possibly think of. Think of a tax incentive, a policy, a regulation, whatever. Don't try to change legislation because you might spend a decade. Or you have to look for a political opportune moment to bring legislation such as this or C-51 or so. But nonetheless, it keeps the attention on the matter, where otherwise I think it would just drop off the radar and nobody will pay attention until we run into some sort of crisis. And if we think that the first and foremost obligation of the state is the safety and security of the citizens and of its political, economic, and societal institutions, then we need to have a mechanism to at least try to keep our eyes on the ball. And that's what I think these reviews do.
That currently exists in this bill, which is similar to other mechanisms we've seen, 5-year review. The language was slightly different. The language in this bill says must, but the language in previous legislation says that the committee is to. And I'm not sure that really gives any more clarity on whether or not committees will be mandated. It will be up to, as you said, whether or not the democratically elected officials at the time or the government at the time places a high priority on it. But clearly this is a high priority, and it's been something that's been neglected for far too long in this country. Would you recommend expediting those reviews to under 5 years? And also, would you recommend language that made it stronger and put the emphasis that this needs to take priority at maybe at the same level as legislation, which usually takes priority at committees?
So when the current government came to power, I think it had 85 reviews on the go at the same time. My concern is that we are too specific with the reviews, and it is generating too many reviews.
About similar subject matter, then he would say I violated the rules of national security. I know exactly what he's up to. And that is why I will continue to do my job, which is Leader of the Opposition, to hold him accountable. I will not be silenced. This is Canada, and in Canada we have the freedom of expression. Thank you.
Are we better off with either a national security and intelligence review or perhaps within the remit of this committee, a 5-year review on countering foreign interference, the mechanisms at our disposal, what did we do 5 years ago, what's working, what's not working, what could work better, rather than trying to limit our swim lane so precisely to one institution and one agency and one particular act.
Thank you. And, some discussion that was on with the last panel was discussing whether this needs to be an independent officer of Parliament. Did you have any feedback on what's the pros and cons, or what would be your recommendation on that matter?
I've written on this publicly. I'm not a big fan of the proliferation of independent officers of Parliament, in part because I think reporting to the executive actually gets us, I think, more timely, more efficient, and in many cases more effective action. And I have a lot of faith in whatever executive is empowered to action. So I don't think an independent officer of Parliament will help with transparency. I do not believe that an independent officer of Parliament will help get things done and will help to get it done faster, better, or sort of more efficiently. So I think the bureaucrats are very well intentioned, or an independent outside judge, or some combination thereof, as Australia has done in the past with people who understand the system. I'm not sure you'll get something better out of an independent officer of Parliament, but I'm married, so I know I'm wrong all the time. So,
thank you, Mr. Lloyd. We go now to Ms. Zaid. Ms. Zaid, go ahead, please. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks to all the witnesses. My first question is for Madame.
They put on a big show in here. We've already passed a motion like this, by the way. The government didn't do anything because the NDP kept them in power. And back in committee, they do exactly the same thing. They speak, they go to hold press conferences and act all tough. Back in committee, all they do is give all the procedural support necessary for the Prime Minister to cover it up again and again and again.